GM friends, and welcome to this Future of Gaming Deep Dive. In this series and in this episode specifically, we plan on taking a deep dive into managing deep and complex game economies. And so if you would go out and look for the 5 people that know most about this specific topic, you're bound to find our special guest of this episode, which is Hilmar Veigar Pétursson, the CEO of CCP Games, who are best known as the creators of EVE Online. EVE Online has existed almost 20 years and is widely considered to be the game with the most complex economy that exists. Hilmar, super excited to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be here.
And then we also have Bitcraft partner and my colleague Carlos Pereira, who is our go-to guy when a team is building an MMO with an open economy. So if you are a team that's building that, Carlos is the person you should talk to. Carlos, welcome.
Hey, thank you.
All right, let's dive in. Hilmar, could you briefly describe EVE Online's core economic loop and what makes it different from other games?
So in its most simple way, then EVE Online is a game about spaceships, or as they are colloquially called in EVE Online, internet spaceships. The phrase in EVE Online is internet spaceship is serious business, which is true in many dimensions. So when it comes to building spaceships, then spaceships are mostly made out of minerals, which reside in asteroids. There is more to it. We have certainly built on this system. But if you go to the beginning, when EVE was in its most primal form, then you mine some asteroids. They contain minerals. You refine the minerals. You build either out of them spaceships in according to blueprints, or you build components that then fit onto spaceships. You then presumably use the spaceships to become better at mining minerals and transporting them around. Or what some people choose to do, you would rather just rob the people that are currently mining the minerals, take them away and build your own spaceships for those purposes. Then the dream is to band together with thousands of your internet spaceship friends, form an alliance, and claim territory, which then gives you mining rights to the minerals of the territory. But that means everyone wants to come and stop you from doing that. So you have to defend the borders and sort of implement your own version of rule of law within that territory.
Does it make sense to think of EVE Online as a traditional economy? And if it does, what will be its GDP?
So we shockingly wondered about this for the longest time. And we did hire an economist in 2008, and I proposed to him this exact question. His name was Dr. Eyjólfur Guðmundsson. He's a resource economist, and he joins. And I proposed this question to him, and says it's probably best that you start playing the game a bit, just to kind of we have a basic conversation. He starts playing the game. And he does that for about a month. And at that point, I sit down with him, and he had really gone deep on the game. EVE Online is a game which is either for you or not for you in some ways. And this was the game for him. So he had gone quite deep and gotten to know every aspect of the game. And I was sitting down with him kind of in debriefing after the first month. So is this not a little bit like an economy? And he said, Hilmar, well, it's not really like an economy. It's just an economy. And you could actually reason that it's a better economy than most economies, because economies, as we understand them, are usually a statistical approximation of human activity, because getting true and real immediate economic data is not really readily available. You have to make inferences, you have to make checks, you have to build up a picture. Economies actually are more like a simulation of what's going on rather than what's actually going on. But in a massively multiplayer online game that persists everything that happens into a database, you know exactly what's going on. So in his hot take after a month of playing, then it was an economy and maybe the best one he had ever seen.
And did he give you a number? GDP number, GDP per capita number?
So the thing about these kind of, and you see this often when people are evaluating economies, is that they're doing it on some exchange rate basis to some other economy. So if you were to take, for example, let's look at the sort of, there's a gray market about assets in even like happens with any persistent state MMO. If I were to take that number, multiply that with the total amount of money in even line, I would get numbers in billions. But that doesn't mean you could liquid the economy. The economy isn't really liquid in the exchange rate over to dollar. So I know people do this a lot, where they take a few transactions and multiply it by the total amount of virtual currency. I haven't really been a fan of that, so I actually don't really know, but I did for sport take a look at it at some point, and you very quickly get into tens of billions. So we more focus on what the economy is like in our own virtual currency, which is called ISK, or Interstellar Credit with a K, because it's cool.
Love that. It reminds me of some of the shit coins out there in the Web3 space, where the supply is 15 quadrillion or something, and then the moment you sell one for $1, you're suddenly a quadrillionaire. So liquidity is important to take into in mind when considering the value of things. We started this by comparing game economies to traditional economies, and traditional economies are an approximation of what's happening. Game economies are literally what's happening. There are other things that you have in hand as a game designer that you don't have in hand as when you're a traditional economist. You're in charge of the game as well. What is your experience with the control you have on the game? What kind of roles does a game developer take, and how has your experience been around that over the past 20 years?
So I would say the experience of over the past 20 years has been figuring out a lot. Even if I would say the initial conditions behind EVE Online were pretty sound, and evidenced by the fact that it has been going on for almost 20 years, then these kind of things were largely not very well understood at the time when we were making them. We also were 27-year-olds in Iceland and maybe lacked, any experience of running economies. So we have been collectively figuring out a lot by doing many sort of experiments in the economy, some of which have been written about in various PhD papers throughout the past decades, where it becomes a bit of an experimental kitchen for how humans collectively behave in a system that has certain types of incentives. And I would say what is maybe the hardest or which took us a while is to organize the various agencies we have while operating a virtual world. So agency is a really good word, and maybe go and explain that a bit. So as a CEO of a company, I have a certain type of agency. As a game designer in EVE Online, I have a certain type of agency. So what is my ability to do to affect things? So when you are operating a virtual world like EVE Online, you have several types of agencies. At the most basic level, we are doing something which is like orchestrating the physics of the world, where we are like messing about with the Planck constant or the weak and strong nuclear power or something on a very basic level. Then there's a level where we're operating as nature, where we're kind of deciding on distribution of resources in the world, whether they're symmetrically distributed, asymmetric distributed, etc. And if we start like from the layer of the physics, you almost need physicists to operate on that layer as a background. When it comes to making nature, it's kind of an ecology, kind of a skill set. Then, once you have done your physics and your ecology, then you add humans to the system, and people playing a game. There is like it's important to think of specialization of the people that are participating in a sophisticated economy, because if you look through history, how have economies come to be? They've usually start from the basis of specialization. So we start as being kind of a hunter-gatherer society. It's not a high amount of specialization. It's small bands roaming around. People could argue that this was when we were the happiest. And then agriculture is invented. Agriculture includes a lot of specialized jobs into the system, because to know how to, selectively breed corn to become the corn we know today, you need to specialize quite a bit in being able to do that. You need to understand how you're going to rotate crops so that you're not kind of getting diminishing return on year 3. You need to know how to work the produce. You need to make mills. You need to, there's a whole degree of specialization that comes in. So as soon as people invent basically corn, they try to find a way to mediate between specialized jobs. And initially, they're actually using weights of corn. That's how people did trade in the most essential way. This is a very cumbersome way of doing it. And at some point, they come up with the idea of minting coins. I think it's well before it's 2000 BC or something like that. So the coins become the ability to mediate between specialization. And that's the formation of trade. Trade also goes a lot into the asymmetric distribution of resources and value on the earth. There are places that are sunny. There are places that are humid. There are places that have uranium. There are places that have oil. We know this well. So you need to account for all this in your virtual world to build a sophisticated economy. So the specialization of roles is something that you need to invest quite a bit in. Eve does this quite a bit. So some of the complexity of the game comes from the fact that there's to deal with the complexity, you need to specialize. So you're the expert in that field. And then we also need to think of things like probably labor mobility is a good term for it. So how are you going to make sure that there is some friction in just casually be a jack of all trades, or like there has to be some investment in the specialization. And then once you have those conditions, then people start to flexibly organize at scale. As it's extremely well laid out in the book Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, then that is the most unique human aspects. So monkeys can flexibly organize at a small scale. Insects can inflexibly organize at a huge scale. Humans are the only species ever on planet Earth that can organize flexibly at scale. And once you have all those conditions, then you could argue that you have an economy, because you have specialized specialization of roles that can organize into a social cohesion. In our case, they're called corporations. They can actually band together in a larger social cohesion called alliances. And even if players didn't think that was enough, they even added coalitions or factions on top of it. And these can be meta structures that may be grouped together 100,000 people. And And then the ultimate goal of each social entity is some form of world domination, where they want to rule all of EVE Online to kind of organize the chaos in the system into some social order. So this all up and down the stack you need to master to be able to create a fully functional economy, all the way from the physics to the ecology to the role specialization, to give tools to organize flexibly at scale and give purpose such that people will use their, love or greed to want to wield these structures for either creating peace or creating war.
That's awesome. And it goes perfectly into what I wanted to ask about next. Wanted to go a little bit deeper into the societal structure of EVE, both at the macro, right, of whether it's corporations, factions, alliances, and then down to the individual, right? Like, who is the typical EVE player? And in going through that, I'd love to delineate between, for example, what labor may exist off game, right? To the extent that people are employing real world physical labor to support them, as I've heard it may be the case in a few places. And then also within the labor structure, for example, blue collar labor of people that are just doing more simple tasks like mining and transporting versus more complex tasks. And what are those complex tasks? And then, for example, who's funding the game? And is that the person who's funding the game also playing the game? Or are there people that are basically investors and those that are more labor? So yeah, I just wanted to sort of open-ended ask to go one layer deeper on the society structure of EVE and how it connects to the physical world.
So we built some social organizational tools into the game when it releases in 2003. We release with a pretty sophisticated, at least for the time, kind of a role-based title and security system, which was very much modeled after sort of mainframe security models. Or like network security models, so that you could limit who you are trusting with access inside your organization. We added to that even where we allowed people into kind of compartmentalize the organizational assets into even more separate access control with something called kind of secure containers and role-based for hangar access and things like that. And then in 2004, we added this kind of alliance system where you can band together families of corporations into kind of like something that was inspired by some of the Asian mega corporations, which are these kind of cartel-like structures of fairly big corporations that sort of band together to be some of the large Asian mega corporations. And then once we have done that, then a lot of the additional things that people started doing was building their own tools. So, and this is actually something I wish we would have done a better job of, but it turns out it's really hard to make social organizational tools. You very quickly enter into kind of why people have HR systems and various corporation control systems. In reality, EVE Online is really at the same complexity level that if you can make flexible tools for EVE players, you probably should be doing them for Fortune 500 companies also. So we kind of failed in many ways to just keep up with EVE players. So what we started to do, we started to open up APIs for EVE Online players to build their own organizational tools. So if you look at your typical EVE Online players today, or sort of corporations today, the biggest one, they usually have fairly large IT department to manage their off-the-shelf tool usage. If you want to get an insight into that, you can go into, there's a GitHub repository called Awesome EVE, where you can get an inventory of all the various tools that the EVE community has built against this API system, and which then many of the larger organizations, they built against that. They implement onboarding program for new employees. They have recruitment programs. They have ship replacement programs. There are various things that EVE players have created to run their companies effectively. And at some point, the game at the highest level is a lot about who has better IT department and IT security departments than anything else. So we increasingly think more our role is to maybe provide tools for people to build tools when it comes to the social organization. So as to your kind of one of the questions you were asking, what kind of people are providing work in the system? Well, some of them are just really IT professionals managing access controls and securities, and many of the EVE alliances, when I talk to them, they're kind of complaining about their tech debt in their internal organizational tools, because they, by now, after decades of working on this, have turnover, etc., just like any company will have. So what are some of the jobs that people are doing inside EVE? They definitely go up and down the scale. One of them is providing IT services and information systems for Fortune 500 level complexity systems. A lot of them is about logistics. It's a war game, and wars are usually won on logistics. So how people manage their logistics is a big deal, and those become jobs, I think, which have a lot of mirroring in reality. We often hear stories from people that have been managing logistics in EVE Online corporations and then learned a lot about it and then started to make a professional career in logistics. And often in their job interviews, they show what they have been doing with their Excel sheets in EVE Online. And EVE Online players by far make the most beautiful Excel sheets. And the people specializing in logistics in reality very quickly see, well, we need more of this. So that's one aspect. There's a lot of leadership. Leadership on the most primal level in EVE Online are done by what are called fleet commanders, or FCs for short. They are the nuts and bolts to any warfare in EVE Online happens through fleet commanders. It's by far, I think, the most challenging job in EVE Online. It is probably similar to being like a squad commander in the military during warfare. That's kind of where the rubber meets the road. It's from the corporate strategy meets, we need to keep everyone alive here. And the people that have success on that front are legends in EVE Online. There are also people that call the shots and run big strategic agendas, and they often have a lot of notoriety, but the most respect I see for a job in EVE Online is being a fleet commander.
And what can you tell us about mobility, social mobility, and inequality in EVE? Is there usually a path for someone to come in and mine and transport and move up, or do you require a lot of capital to be up? Like, what is the, if someone plays EVE for 5 years, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, how much mobility do they get?
So this is one of the challenges we have on the outside. So you look at EVE Online from afar. It's a game that's been going on for 20 years. Should I start playing now? Am I not way too late to start right now? And so it's a little bit like reality. So should I start a company in reality because, I don't know, Bill Gates has all the money? I could never catch up. Still, people found companies in reality. Some of them even do catch up to Bill Gates. Some of them don't. But that's maybe not really the goal in life. It's just to pass the most stuff when they die. It's not that competition. But we do struggle with this as a perception. But what people routinely find out if you join EVE Online, especially if you either bring friends from reality with you, or you make friends inside the game, you can have a lot of fun operating at the various strata that exists in EVE Online. And often the ones which are the quote-unquote the largest aren't necessarily the most fun to take part in, just like it is more fun to work at a startup than a Fortune 500. Being a challenger to the status quo is an extremely enticing proposition. Often the larger alliances in EVE Online are very settled in their ways and can maybe function a bit like huge bureaucracies do in real life. So often the most fun being had in EVE Online is at a much smaller scale. And that's rife with opportunity. We are actually introducing now a new expansion to EVE Online called Uprising, where we have an improvement to what is called the factional warfare system, which is a bit of a simulated warfare mechanic inside EVE Online. Indeed, to allow people more opportunities to kind of very quickly to get into the fun part of just running small scale sort of squads inside EVE Online, usually wreaking havoc against the bigger ones, or even in this case, the empires. So even if the game has been going on for 20 years, I mean, it's never been a better time to join.
One more question, then I head back to Nico for a bit. It's interesting to start our conversation talking about logistics and IT and all of these corporate tasks, and to finish the segment talking about fun. Is EVE fun, and what does fun mean to you, or what have you learned about what makes games fun from operating EVE? And I asked that in particular against the backdrop of Web3 gaming, where we've obviously spent a lot of time, and people are saying, look, it has to be fun. And everyone says games have to be fun. It's game first. But like, what does fun even mean when we have this awesome game where people are defining fun as being the best logistics manager? So is EVE fun? What does fun mean? And what have you learned about fun?
So I think there are many of these catchphrases used in games, which are very generic. One of them is fun. Another one is AAA. And really, when you start to drill into what does AAA mean to anyone, and you get 50 different answers. And when you ask people what is fun, I think they are usually describing a form of flow state. I very rarely want to laugh out loud when I'm playing a game. I don't think it has ever happened. I've genuinely laughed out loud. So games are certainly not funny, like if we stretch fun a bit. So they're not funny, but still they should be fun. And usually when I start to ask sort of 50 whys about that, what I usually come away with, you're often in some sort of mastery over the challenge the game provides to you. And to reach kind of a flow state, you're usually kind of your skill needs to be matched to the challenge, and you need to feel like you have mastered it. So mastery is probably what is more coming out when I really ask people what they mean by fun. Autonomy also comes out, where people want agency in the game that is different than their agency in real life. So I want to be able to master things in a game I cannot master in real life. And purpose comes out also. I am cheating a bit. This is a book written by Daniel Pink about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. But this is more of a design target, I think, rather than think in these very abstract terms of fun. And it's often what people say, and EVE certainly has many moments that introduce extremely strong feelings that are on the spectrum. There's also an element of intensity in EVE Online, because when you're playing EVE Online, a lot can be at stake. So that again goes into this sort of mastery element of like, when you do play EVE Online, there's a lot to master. And it's a lot in the scope of people will, in the case of EVE Online, spend almost 20 years to master it. Because some of the mastery you need to master is other people playing the game. And figuring out how you organize people into do your bidding, so to speak, is an infinite journey. So while what I do think people probably laugh out loud quite a bit, and I've heard recordings of that many times in EVE Online, but that's usually when people come together and they are passionate about something, laughter will come out. So I think when you mix together all the challenges, all the ability in EVE Online to give you something to master, the freedom the game provides, which relates to autonomy, the purpose of your social group that is playing there with you, and the meaningful, deeper friendships you make in playing the game, I think when you take all this in aggregate, that is fun. And I then relate fun more to happiness than kind of being funny or laughing out loud. I can make credible, I think by now, after 20 years of learning about it, statements that the game does increase happiness when people get kind of to the highest peaks of EVE Online. It also counterintuitively generates misery. And in our experience, you need to have both for any one of them to have meaning.
Love that. You mentioned a bit before the societal models and all of the functionalities and tooling you've implemented within EVE Online. Would it be fair to say that these societal models that you've implemented and the flexibility that players have to organize in the ways that they see fit is one key aspect that differentiates EVE Online and one of the cornerstones of its success?
I think one of the cornerstones of its success relates back to the economy we were starting on, is that the economy was set up in a sustainable way. And the biggest part of that is that when a spaceship is destroyed in EVE Online, it's really gone. And somebody has to build it from scratch again. It's not left on the field. You can't recover and repair it. Half the modules are actually left in a loot container, which is a part of the incentive structure why PvP works in EVE Online. But the majority of the economic value is gone. And now somebody needs to do the work of finding the minerals, assembling them into components, and rebuild the ship. So every time there is destruction in EVE Online, there needs to be replenishment. So the economic loop was pretty sound to begin with. Then, because we had the ability to do so, we could make the game quite big, and we make the game single shard. So EVE Online is not little copies of itself. It is one contiguous universe where everyone exists on a topology that is the map of EVE Online. So I think the sustainable economy, the fact that it is one world and thus everyone can affect each other, that's when we got a pretty strong network effect where every new player into the system brings value to everyone else there. I think we've seen in later years the power of network effects when it comes to many aspects of life. So I think sound economy, single shard, and there's strong network effect. And then the fact that the game is multiple impossible games to complete. And thus people had to band together to be able to get somewhere inside the game, which has then led to a component that we've gotten more and more sophisticated in understanding, which is kind of the friendship machine aspect of EVE Online, is that when we ask people that have played the game for 20 years or close to, Why do they stay for such a long time in the game? And it's every answer relates to the friends they've made inside the game. And we've even gotten that to the point where we started to understand why EVE Online makes more friendships than, to some extent, reality does.
How generalizable are the learnings that you just described? Would you feel comfortable building a fantasy MMO from scratch?
I think they're quite generalizable. I think I'm generalizing a lot here about them. And that is by now almost like a requirement to make a successful game. You have to be, if you want to make an MMO, you need to be able to master these kind of things at the general level. Then you also need to execute game development on modern standards on top of it. So I think that's one of the reasons why there are so few MMOs coming out in recent times, is the combination of you need to master all the challenges of EVE Online, and then you need to execute at the level of a modern hundreds of $1 million game in terms of gameplay and graphics. And I think the juxtaposition of these two things is quite the combination.
So Carlos and I are both members of the Bitcraft crypto team, and so naturally we would love to have your take on how you're thinking around Web3. For me, the key difference between Web2 and Web3 is a fully open economy with zero friction between value in the real economy and the game economy. But would love to hear your thinking around that.
Yeah, so I think like Web3 is one of those very broad terms, like AAA and fun, that it's hard really to get broken down in any detail to get something from it. What I hear a lot about is about ownership, governance, value transferring between, etc. I hear a lot of these things. And when I look at what people are talking about in relation to Web3, it sounds a lot like my job has been for the past 20 years. We have certainly been taking care of spaceships in a database for 20 years under the guise, even if our end user license agreement actually doesn't agree with our marketing message. That is an unfortunate function of the time the game is created in. You have to really set up things like that. But we certainly tell EVE Online players that everything in EVE Online is theirs. And we have largely upheld that for the past 20 years. So when you look at, is there a better way to store things in a database? Maybe a decentralized database is better. But those upstarts have something to prove since we've been doing it for longer. So just the ontology of EVE Online at least provides some credibility that we can operate a database for decades. But still, I'm not dismissing it. I mean, it's a cool idea to make a database that nobody owns, and maybe that will outlast databases that somebody owns. I think on its highest macro sense, it's the decentralized systems in general are less fragile than centralized systems, even if centralized systems can be more efficient in the short term. So I don't think the idea is preposterous. I think the technology has some ways to go. And I think the ideals, if we maybe take all the noise away of ownership, governance, sovereignty, all these things are good values to build for. So we have certainly been curious in monitoring and seeing what's going on. I think we're still waiting for the perfect example of something that brings all of that together. And I'm eager to either see it or to be proven wrong if you have concrete examples. I mean, an EVE Online style game at the scale and complexity of EVE Online, and then also being decentralized and self-owned and open source and whatnot. I mean, these it sounds on paper like a cool idea, but it seems people have lost their ways a bit in just sort of perpetual FOMO about something, so I think it remains to be seen whether we will actually get an experience like that.
I think, one thing that I'd love to, I heard the story once, but I'd love for you to share it with others, was in the topic of challenges with player self-sovereignty and governance and all of that. Once upon a time, you told me a story about a bank in EVE that ran away with everyone's money, and dealing with that, and also the good that came to EVE from that experience. So I was hoping that we could use that story to touch on some of the challenges of player self-governance and the role of the developer in those systems, and the pros and cons and opportunities that come from it.
Yeah. So early in EVE Online's history, there was this case where there was an organization inside EVE Online that was of notable size for the game at the time. It was about 500 people that belonged to that organization, and they were quite successful in the game. They were really good at working together. They had amassed together some territory they were controlling, were reaping the benefits of that and kind of growing in size and influence. Somebody joins that organization and really starts to contribute very quickly, rises to the corporate ranks in a few months. It might even have been a year. It's 6 months to 12 months in kind of that person really is a diligent member of the organization and earns the trust of everyone involved. They then, once they had gained everyone's trust, at some moment use the access to take all the assets of the corporation away and just run away with them. And this had never happened, and certainly not to that scale. So there was an outrage in the player community and saying, CCP needs to undo this. This person has, quote unquote, cheated in the game. They've taken our hard-earned earnings and run away with them. And there was even an outrage inside the company. And the outrage inside the company was both that, but also 500 people is a lot. At the time, due to kind of some challenges with our original publishing plan, then we had about 30,000 people play EVE at this time. So 500 people were like a sizable part of our economics, and the company was barely profitable. So there was an outcry. We have to undo this. Like 500 people are super upset. They're really petitioning us to just make them whole or just undo it. And of course, we could just do either one of those things. We could roll back the server state to the place where they were not robbed. I didn't have the idea of forking the server state to run first two versions of EVE, one where it happened and one where it didn't happen, which was later experimented with. But or we could just print the money and give them the money. None of these seemed really like good solutions. Rolling back the state would hurt everyone else. They would lose their progress. Printing the money would also, in a way, hurt everyone else. We would dilute their asset. Trying to take down the person and retrace their economic impact. There was already a spider web of interactions. Very hard to undo that. So there were certainly the logistics of undoing it were not trivial, even if we could probably solve that. We came to the conclusion that if you just break some people's trust, that is not ours to uphold. Lying and cheating is a part of human behavior, and we're not here to regulate that. So we said, well, the person didn't really cheat in the game. They didn't hack anything, didn't do anything against the rule. You just shouldn't trust people that shouldn't be trustworthy. And I can not really tell you how to do that. I have no magic solution for that either. And this led to close to 500 people leaving the game. The company is now officially in the red. So, like, put your money where your mouth is was certainly tested for us at that time. And this is a big problem. And we're like, oh, we made the wrong call. We should go back. We should make it all whole again. But we kind of held the line and just lived with our decision, even if we certainly doubted whether it was the right one. But then PC Gamer writes an 8-page spread about the whole thing. And 5,000 people joined the game because here's a world where people live and die by the rules of the universe. There's not some big daddy or motherly figures that just makes everything right if things go wrong. So when this happened, it kind of felt a bit like a test for whether we're really serious about running an autonomous world of sorts.
It's a really great story. In line with, comparing games to real life where there are no gods that can just rewind what happened. You mentioned earlier that, people still start companies, although it might be difficult to catch up to Bill Gates. But if I would want to catch up to Bill Gates, I cannot do that by doing the same thing that he did. I have to innovate and use technology perhaps to leverage and in a way, create more value faster in order to catch up to him. Technology and innovation leverages the ground principles of real life. How are you providing the flexibility within a game to allow for the same things to happen?
So I think true technology innovation in EVE largely happens through the kind of third-party development ecosystem where people are building better sort of mousetraps to run companies inside EVE. True technology innovation is unfortunately not encoded into the physics of the game. The innovation largely happens by us, CCP, releasing new spaceships, new blueprints, etc. I would love for us to come up with sort of innovation physics such that true innovation can happen at the base layer. It's a really high bar to come up with game physics that allows for that, at least in a way where it just doesn't end very quickly, where somebody just traces through I wouldn't say the tech tree. In this case, you wouldn't have any tech tree, but it's an extremely high bar to come up with physics that allow for such innovation. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's a high bar. So most of the innovation in EVE Online is about some social composability rather than any other form of composability. And usually people are looking at organizations and say, well, I can do that better than we do things around here. I'm going to found my own thing, or I don't like the leadership and we're going to do something different. So often it's kind of a social stress, cultural reasons that people are leaving, or they don't feel like they're progressing enough in their career, or they have an idea of like, we really should do X. I think we can, because the story is well known, and we were talking about Bill Gates. So there is this guy who's done pretty important things in gaming called Gabe Newell, who made Steam. He was for the longest time at Microsoft, where he was kind of lobbying Microsoft to do something like Steam. And I think he then leaves in the kind of almost with a plan of like, okay, I'll guess it's not possible here. I'm going to make it myself. Obviously, he starts by creating Half-Life. And then kind of Steam comes along for the journey, largely hated by everyone for the first, I don't know how many years. It was not very popular. And now Gabe Newell is Gaben, the god of all PC gaming, largely worshipped mostly by Reddit. And he did all this despite Bill Gates having all the money, and he was even working for him. So the stories of EVE Online are often a bit similar. where people have a new scheme they want to try out. Leadership of the current social organization will have none of that, and they just go out to prove a point.
How do you balance? You just mentioned people hating Steam, and it reminded me of a question I wanted to ask you about the EVE online players and the community. How do you balance their wishes for the game with what you think will make the game more fun and more engaging?
That is very hard. It's both hard because it's hard to do the right thing all the time. As they say, you can please all of the people some of the time, some of the people all of the time, but not all the people all the time. And sometimes we just make mistakes. Well, we don't have godly wisdom on what to do. Sometimes we try things and they don't really work super well out, and we have to clean up sometimes after ourselves. We're actually coming out of a pretty tough period with EVE Online, where we had to fix things in the economy. The economy was not well in balance. There was a lot of disparity in agency and power inside the economy due to something we did fairly long time ago, where we introduced super capitals into the game, particularly super capitals that could do mining in a way more industrial scale than before, without introducing a huge amount of trade-off in terms of risk. And it was all out of whack. We have had many presentations about this at many fan events and our own communication about that. So we are kind of coming out of a scarcity period in EVE, where we had to rebalance the economy, which actually EVE Online is a really good place now. We have several economy indicators that show that the economy is better set up for a third decade of success to some extent. But nobody likes to live through a recession. It's just not like it's not the popular thing to have to implement austerity or scarcity or recessions in any economy systems. So it's been tough to go through that, but we are now switching gears. We just released a very well-received expansion to the game that is now bringing new toys and new things to do in the sandbox. But so we like any social economy struggle with A, always doing the right thing, and B, when we don't, we need to clean up after ourselves. And that is just tough to do.
It's fascinating how even a virtual economy can have a recession. Given that, living in Europe, one of the main reasons for recession is a shortage of energy, right? Gas and oil coming from Russia. Theoretically, Hilmar, you could just press a button and have more oil and gas.
Yes. But I could also theoretically just make a button in EVE Online, press it, and win the game. Where would be the fun in that?
That's a good answer.
I'd actually love to go deeper into that. I feel like one thing that has always stuck with me whenever we speak about game design is I feel like I've never heard you talk about designing a game where you're designing a specific loop. It's like as if, if we were talking about a racing game, which this isn't, I've never heard you talking about designing a racetrack. I've only heard you talking about designing the conditions that would make people want to have a racetrack. And that in EVE, the gameplay is largely an emergent property of something else that you're designing. And I'd love it if you could just talk to us a little bit about your philosophy of design and what things belong to direct design versus indirect design and the role of emergent gameplay for a good or for a fulfilling experience.
Yeah, so designing for emergence is very much our ethos. If you look at planet Earth and our involvement in it, there's not a lot of game loops which have been designed for us. All human behavior is solving through emergent gameplay puzzles that have either been left there by somebody or just a random act of geology and geology and ecology. And we always wanted to make this kind of community-driven social sandbox. So when you are aiming about doing that, then it's a lot more making kind of a Minecraft than it is making a God of War. So that is just the stance you need to take when you're making a sandbox. You have to design for emergence, and that is hard to do. It's way more unstructured. You have to believe a lot in the player that is playing, that people are really gonna figure out how to make something of this. But that is what we decided to do, and that is what we have made. Certainly, there are gameplay loops designed within it. The combat system in EVE Online is designed to be quite engaging. The engaging in combat, to my comments about fleet commanders before, is an extremely kind of high-end game activity. There are aspects of that where you even see people posting their heart rates after playing EVE Online, and their pulse rate is going up to 200. It's like a person completing Ironman or something, engaging in PvP in EVE Online. So the gameplay and the context around it is quite engaging. Of course, we're doing it in a single-threaded MMO, so we don't have a lot of computing resources to spend on it, because we have to have it scaled to like 8,000 person fleet fights, which is about, I don't know, it's probably at least, I don't know how much more it is than what people have even attempted. I don't think anyone is really at 1,000. So I think we have matches of few hundreds, and then we have even like at 8,000. So we're quite constrained in what we can do, but I think we have even some ideas on how we can improve at that. But there are sort of gameplay loops which are in EVE and could absolutely be improved. Another gameplay loop in the more classical sense is the actual process of mining, which could definitely be improved of. It doesn't have a lot of unpredictable outcomes. It's a fairly sort of rule-based system that is way too consistent. And I think we would be well served in making that more probabilistic, more like golden nugget feelings and things like that. So there are gameplay loops in EVE which absolutely could be improved upon. And we do have people which dedicate their life in doing that on the dev team. But both my upbringing around EVE Online and my involvement in EVE Online is more about the emergent aspects, about the economy, about the social system, etc. So that's why I'm more fluent in those matters. We have people that specialize more in getting sort of second-to-second interaction patterns to a better state.
And what's the how often are you targeting violence as the emergent property, or not property, but as the intermediary thing that happens between whatever you do and wherever the players end?
So as we talked about the example earlier, where somebody infiltrated the corporation and stole all the assets, that is a form of violence. Like the people involved in that, they felt violated. And it isn't maybe violence in the hand-to-hand combat sense. Nobody really gets a bruise from playing EVE Online or a broken arm. Although I guess even that might have happened. Like I said, some of the PvP engagements in EVE are quite intense. So people might even just harm themselves from throwing the monitor on the floor. I know I've been that guy almost at some point, and that was like a CRT monitor of size. When I lost the spaceship I borrowed from a friend in EVE, which is another story for another day. So the breaking of trust, negative emotions, feeling violated of sorts in a very virtual sense, I think, add to the intensity of EVE. And when we have been doing this research into why are people playing EVE Online for decades, they tell us they join for the graphics and they stay for the friendships they make inside the game. We started to analyze this. Okay, what is really the components of making a friend? And we found it's proximity, duration, frequency, and intensity. And it's this intensity factor where these kind of sense of loss, sense of broken trust, etc., they come into the intensity factor. The reason why EVE Online is so tense is that there's so much at stake. To make sure you don't have a losing outcome, you need friends to either help you not lose or friends to pick you up if you lose. So the senses of betrayal and almost feeling of being violated, I think add to this intensity that then is the component in the friendship formula that makes the game so effective at creating and forging very deep, meaningful relationships between people.
If we were to plot it on a chart, something like value at stake and the meaningfulness or the emotion, whatever it may be, that goes into that friendship factory. What do you think is the shape of that curve? Meaning, how much value do you need, or do you need a lot of value to get all of the good things you're getting in EVE? And is there a point where there's just so much value at stake that people will refuse to engage? And I'm thinking about this in the context of both games that have no value, and so players just don't care. They don't engage. It's just whatever honor and Call of Duty achievement trophy you may get from it. But then on the opposite end of the spectrum, me against you playing die for a Bored Ape, right? Or it's like, oh man, I don't know if I want to put that on the line, right? And so what do you think is the shape of the curve when you think about the impact of value at stake and people's depth of experience?
So I think it is, so the value at stake in EVE Online is maybe pretty unique because it is usually something you have worked very hard for, either alone or with a group of people, inside the theme of the game. So the value might be irrationally higher in the game than maybe outside of the game. If you were to take something that is at stake in a PvP match, eyeball it on a secondary market, which is terms of service violation in the case of EVE Online, the dollar value might be high, but not in relation to what you feel about it. And this is a little bit how it's hard to value things in different economies purely on the basis of just looking at it from afar, because different things can be differently valuable in different places. The value of fresh water in Iceland is practically zero. There's just endless amounts of it. The value of fresh water in Sahara is very high. So there is that aspect of it. So it's, I don't think people are necessarily making like a value, kind of a monetary value kind of feeling at stake. There's a lot at stake when you're in war at EVE Online. It's the actual value of the things you're losing. It's your honor and reputation as a person in that world. It is maybe you don't mind losing all the value if your friends make it out alive. There are so many complicated, nuanced things that are at stake that I think it would be a disservice to the passion that people put on all the nuance inside, mostly PvP engagement in EVE Online. It isn't so much always about just the value of the ship you just lost. I can relate my own story when I felt the worst from having lost a spaceship in EVE and made maybe that would maybe illuminate some of this. So I obviously was working very hard with a team of people to make Game Online. So I didn't really have much time to actually play it. Sure, we're playing these internal play tests and things like that. But when, quote unquote, nothing is at stake, it's very hard to kind of be truly engaged with the game. So then we released the game. I am very busy making the servers work and figuring out all the broken things and half finished stuff we had released. But a few months into it, I have a baby, or me and my wife, we have a baby. And I'm on paternity leave. And what I quickly find out that when you're on paternity leave and when you're a workaholic like myself, there's a lot of downtime. You really have to be there in case something happens. But there are like good stretches of time where mother and baby are both asleep. So I'm like kind of twiddling my thumbs and maybe to go play a game. I haven't played the game either. So I'm like playing Neverwinter Nights or something like that. And it's like, oh, no, that doesn't really feel like what I should do. So maybe I go and play EVE Online. And I'm like playing EVE Online. And that's also kind of doesn't really feel amazing. I just start making lists of things that are broken and enter into a defect tracking system. So I'm just literally doing work. But then somebody pings me, or a lot of people are pinging me at the time and asking me to join their corporation. And I'm like at the end of my rope on engaging with our defect tracking database on all the things that we need fixing. And I just, let's just do it. I don't really know what to say if somebody asks me who I am, but anyway, I'll just try it out. And this is some little high-sec mining corporation in EVE Online that is playing to get everyone into a battleship. It was kind of what people did back in the early days of EVE. You start in a frigate, you want to build to a cruiser, and you want to get to a battleship. And for everyone listening to this that are playing EVE currently, you actually did mine in battleships back then. So we are there. We're a little kind of high-sec mining corp. The CEO is obviously like an older guy, I quickly figured out, because he is having the problem that his grandson is constantly yanking out his modem cable. Yes, it was played through a modem at the time. And we're there happily mining away. And I'm like, oh, this is fun. We're like mining here together. We quickly figured out there's a big problem with how we're mining, because we're all mining into one can, and then people are doing the hauling, and I'm realizing all the content progression curves are going to get broken because people have already broken the game, or almost about to go and fix that. But then I kind of figured out it's much more interesting to be mining socially, because you have to trust the people who are doing the hauling and whatever. And they're always asking me, like, oh, hey, who are you? It's like, yeah, I live in Iceland. Yeah, what do you do? Well, I kind of work in IT. Do you know the CCP guys? Yeah, of course. It's a small country. So I'm kind of finding this way of like, didn't really want to lie, but I'm kind of answering in generalizations. Then there's this one moment, I'm on just a little frigate. I'm in a little Tristan, and I'm mining like with the others in the smallest ship. And the guy who was like next to me mining, he has a Thorax, which is like a cruiser-sized ship. And he's like, oh, I'm about to log off. See you guys tomorrow. And I'm like, oh, wait. So if you lend me your Thorax, then I can use the Thorax to mine, and I will contribute to the group faster rather than mining in my tiny little frigate. And he's like, okay, well, that's fine. Just follow me back home. I need to drop something off in a space station. I fly with him to the space station, and voila, he gives me the ship, and voila, I'm in a cruiser. It's amazing. But I need to get back to the mining operation where we were doing the mining. And then I'm like, oh, it's far away. And I put like an autopilot path And I go to the toilet while the ship is flying back to the mining hub. And when I come back to the toilet, I look at the screen. There's a picture of a pod. And pod is what happens when your ship explodes. You are like an escape pod. And I actually used the pod quite a bit because I was working on the 3G engine. And I used the pod as a reference model. And when I see the pod on the screen, I'm like, oh, there's the pod. And I'm like, there's the pod. Oh my God, I didn't check the autopilot path for if I was in low security. If I was entering into low security, we didn't have like a good system to validate that at the time. So somebody has gate camped me and exploded the spaceship that I just borrowed from my friend, who's like my new friend in this mining outfit. And he trusted me with his thorax. And I lost it like 10 minutes after he lent it to me. Oh my God, that's so embarrassing. And then I was like, wait a minute. I can just make a new one. I'm the CTO. I can just, I know how to do that. And then I become extremely disappointed in myself, thinking of cheating in my own game. And I was like, cheating? Why does it feel so much like cheating? And at the time, by the way, for context, MMO developers were making shit in their game all the time. And I was like, it feels so wrong. And I'm so disappointed in myself. And I'm standing on the floor, like stricken, having all these feelings over the fact that I lost the spaceship that was maybe worth, I don't know, $10 or $100. I don't really know what in those days economies today. It certainly wouldn't be worth a lot today. A thorax in Himalayan is not an expensive ship. And it is devastating me. So I then obviously don't do anything unallowed. And I start mining in Himalayan to repay my friend the thorax and mine even more so I can make up to the corporation to the time they lost because I lost the spaceship and like now and all those things. And then I end up sitting there mining away for the next few weeks. And my wife comes and looks at me and it's like, Hilmar, what is wrong with you? You've spent the past 3 years death crunching to make this game and you sit here mining in it. What is wrong with you? Well, we don't think about it. I need to repay my internet friend the spaceship I borrowed. And it's like, and yeah, so there can be a lot at stake and it's not just the money.
It's probably the best story I've heard so far about game creator and its own creation. You sitting there for weeks mining away. Love that. Yeah. We're coming up on time. Unfortunately, I've enjoyed this, and I still have a bunch of questions, but we'll have to do that some other time. Carlos, Hilmar, thank you guys so much. Hilmar, you specifically for taking the time and answering all of our questions. There's a lot to dig into here, and some fantastic anecdotes that you told us about Eve. Learned a lot, and still a lot to digest for me. So, Hilmar, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for being generous with your time, as always.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
All right, listener, I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. It was a long one, but it was worth it. If you did, let us know, join the Discord, and we'll see you soon in the next episode.